Cella System, City of Artray, mid-2670. First Lieutenant O'Brien, Raptor Company, Delta Platoon. Fox was first to lead the group down from the roof, with Dare already having departed towards the central part of the city. Ryder took to the rear, accompanying the Cellian female with O'Brien at the center. Ryder was displeased with watching over the Cellian, and made known her displeasure. "Sir, are you sure we have to watch over her? How do we know she's not a spy? I say we put her down and save us the trouble," spoke Ryder. Her tone was one of disgust and plain disregard. "That's enough," he ordered. "You and Fox will secure the entrance while I secure our friend so that no harm comes to her. It wouldn't be right to send her off into a war zone." Ryder was silenced at his call and moved quietly for the remainder of their transit toward the first floor. When they reached it, Dare left toward the street. "Sir, I'm picking up an ammo cache just outside. I'll go on ahead," he said. "Once I'm full, I'll recon the target." Just outside the entrance, a cache of ammo was embedded into the asphalt in the shape of a rounded cylinder, a tube designed for low-orbit drops. Within it, ammo for their suppressed rifles and sidearms were supplied, enough for a squad. Dare took what he needed for his anti-material rifle, as well as his suppressed marksman rifle respectively, and departed southeast, toward a collection of taller buildings that overlooked a large area. Even O'Brien knew it to be a decent vantage point, but trusted his subordinate's decision. "Stand guard, and be on the lookout for the rest of the platoon," he said. The Cellian then took over, leading him down a flight of stairs and finally into a dark hallway that had no power, thus no light to assist in their travel. Vorta used her personal device to light her way, but O'Brien had no need to. His vision was clear, and the outline of objects was made apparent by his helmet's inborn function, highlighting everyday options as yellow, interactive items as blue, teammates green, and enemies red. As they approached closer, Vorta stopped. At the end of the hall, there was a circular door that acted as her entrance, and it wasn't fastened by electronic locks. Instead, it was mechanical in nature. A series of steel pistons protruded from the sides, connected to a latch that, when turned, extended the pistons into the walls. The door was 2 inches thick, not much against bombs, but enough for small arms. "I don't remember leaving it open like this," she said softly. O'Brien then grabbed her, forcing her to the wall to hide her device, as well as shield her from possible incoming fire. He pulled his rifle up and peered into the room, revealing 2 beds on the left, some furniture in the center, and some desks and drawers on the right. But beyond them, 2 pillars were constructed in the center of the room, and his helmet tried to reach beyond it, to no avail. "Stay here and be quiet. I'll check it out, and you'd best use this door as cover," he said as he readied his weapon. In pure darkness, the helmet operated by passive sonar technology that aided in providing a highlight to objects, but its range was limited to about 15 meters. His active radar module could detect up to 25 meters, simply by showing a red dot on a mini-map in the top left corner of his HUD. As he moved forward, to secure one side of the room, he swept in a wide angle to the left side of the room, then did the same to the right. The room was wide, but fell within the parameters of his night visor. His concern, however, was the part beyond the pillars, and as he inched closer, the part of the room he couldn't see earlier slowly revealed itself to him, as well as 2 individuals using the pillars as cover. They had noticed his movements by his muffled steps, but it was too late as he fired into them. The one closest to him was fast to react, charging him, but O'Brien planted his rear foot into the ground behind him and delivered a kick to the chest of the attacking Cellian. The kick was explosive as it caused him to recoil from the kick, leaving it gasping for air. With his rifle still up, he fired into the second, with the sound of thick plastic cracking until it no longer moved. Then he turned his attention to the grounded Cellian as it writhed. "What are you doing here?" inquired O'Brien. He found it odd that they would target the home of a stranded civilian for a search. It didn't add up. It continued to squirm, holding its chest and gasping for air. "It doesn't concern you, Terran," it said in disgust. It wasn't willing to reveal much, and it had tried to reach for its weapon when it spoke to him, and he wasn't in the mood to interrogate. As a mercy, he fired into the chest of the Celian male with 3 shots. With the body now still, he called to the entrance of the room. "Pack your essentials, you're coming with me," he said, dismissing the 2 corpses that now lie behind the structural pillars of Vorta's room. She did as he said, taking care to move throughout her home as she stuffed what she claimed to be essential: extra clothes, family ornaments, and heirlooms, along with memorabilia of her family and friends. She would come to miss her home, but for now, she heeded the words of the man who silently and effortlessly felled 2 warriors of Celia. "Where will we go?" she then asked as she continued to stuff her personal bag of belongings. "Might be best to have you vacate the town. I can arrange for transport and you can be in orbit in less than an hour," he said. He motioned through his wrist-mounted display, ready to issue the request when she denied. "No, not yet," she said. "I need to find my sister, Tola. I'm not leaving the city without her." Her tone emanated conviction, and he was going to be hard-pressed to say no. He raised his hands, conceding to her statement. "Very well, but you'll listen to my orders. I'm not going to risk having a civilian on the front lines. You'd only risk the safety of my troopers." "Got it?" he said in a stern voice. He didn't want to bring her, but it was likely that she was going to trail them anyway. So he thought it's best to tag with them, as they would a field reporter of the Republic News Network. Their presence irritated him, usually by getting in the way during a firefight, with him having to divert manpower to their protection. It wasted their combat effectiveness. But if he kept her to the protection of a rhino, then he could get away with taking her along. After they left the room, he stopped just after going up the stairs to the first floor of the building, and Fox and Ryder remained on guard near the entrance. "I don't think we've properly introduced ourselves," he began. He outstretched his hand with the light from outside lighting up their surroundings. Taking a closer look, she was unnerved by the sinister markings on his helmet, mimicking a laughing face with a mouth wide open, lined with razor-like teeth. She was reluctant, but met his hand in a similar fashion. It was large and sturdy compared to hers, and the rough exterior of his suit added to the coarseness of his hands, similar to a feeling from an older partner, whose face had already begun to wrinkle. Instead of a metal jaw, the visage of predatory eyes and a wide maw were all that began to fill her head, and she wondered who they looked like behind the mask. However, when he spoke, his presence alleviated mind enough that she had nearly forgotten she was in a war zone, let alone the 2 soldiers who entered her home. But with him, she felt safe. "Vorta," she said. "Vorta Volkala, a pleasure." She bowed in customary Celian tradition. "Lieutenant O'Brien," he replied. He gave a bow similar to Vorta, when she gave a small chuckle. "What's so funny? Did I do it wrong?" "No, it's just that my greeting is usually done by the women in our culture. The men's is quite different, but perhaps I can show you another time," she replied, offering now a less formal, reserved greeting. "Perhaps," he added, when a call from Ryder came from the entrance. "Sir, the rest of the platoon is here," she reported, snapping Vorta back to reality and causing O'Brien's demeanor to shift to the warrior she was first met with. "Set up a perimeter while I gather the squad leads," he ordered. Fox and Ryder did as he requested, relaying to the others in the platoon to do the same. When he departed the entrance, with Vorta close behind him, he was met with the ragged appearance of his platoon. Those under Strega were hit the hardest, with much of her platoon holding each other up from their injuries, with more being loaded up in their APC and a pair of Pumas if storage allowed. Their armor was scarred, and some were missing parts of their armor plating, namely from their shins and shoulders. Auclair's second squad was hit the same, suffering from many of the same injuries and the corpsmen working overtime to alleviate their injuries, with their medical supplies quickly running out. However, Jericho and Blythe's squads were nearly untouched, telling how little resistance they went through. "Squad leads, sit rep," he ordered. Jericho and Blythe were first to meet him, with Auclair and Strega following not long after. Both had sustained injuries, like many of their subordinates, with Strega applying pressure to her abdomen with the stain of blood present. Eau Claire had her arm wrapped with tightly bound gauze, having taken less damage than the former. After regrouping, Jericho was the first to report. As you ordered, we were able to retarget the cannons. After comms had cleared, Minerva took over. We had little resistance, so we took a few losses. Just some scrapes and bruises, he said. Blythe was silent, but nodded to Jericho's report. We hit 'em fast, and took the cannon. But their soldiers don't seem like much, he added. You can probably take their city with a division of the orbital troopers. They're that much of a pushover. Blythe turned to Strega and Eau Claire, who only glared at him, when the lead of Bravo Squad began her report. Unlike those two, the North was heavily guarded. They had some armor, and to top it off, sniper support. From the looks of it, I think another set of troopers rolled through. Luckily, Minerva took over and blew it, enough to cover our escape, replied Eau Claire. Strega looked around O'Brien, noticing the lack of a certain individual. By the way, where's Dare? She asked. I want to say thanks for the cover. They would have had us, if not for him. He's setting up to cover our advance. But why don't you tell him yourself? Replied O'Brien. I would, she replied, pointing to the right side of her helmet. Took a graze by a sniper, knocked my comms. Even my night vision is starting to act up. She tapped against the side of her helmet to manually ease the supposed glitches happening to her HUD. He pulled out a device on his hip, bringing it to chest level. Athena, think you can rework her HUD and comms? Inquired O'Brien. I can do nothing for her comms, and her visor array has taken light physical strain. I can do little for her systems. The same goes for the raiders who suffer similar symptoms, replied the AI. What systems do you have up? He asked, gauging what remained of his combat effectiveness. Reticle and compass, the bare minimum, and my map is too glitched out to read, replied Strega. O'Brien asked the same of Eau Claire, who replied with more up systems compared to her comrade. What of our reinforcements? I saw pods drops, loads of them, inquired Strega, grimacing at the pain to her side. All of Raven, Cobra, and most of Viper, then us, replied her commanding officer. Our platoon is the only one remaining out of Raptor Company. Echo and Foxtrot are assisting the fleet in boarding parties. Can either of your squads continue? The two in question looked at one another, then to their soldiers in question. Several were wrapped in bandages and gauze as they held the perimeter, with others barely holding themselves up from the pain they were enduring. We've got some resting in the rhinos, but they need medevac, added Eau Claire. This would reduce their effectiveness, but he had an obligation to their safety and well-being. He could very well push them beyond their limits, but they weren't in a position where he could ask that of them. They had aerial support and a fleet commander who knew very little losses. It was the least he could do. I'll radio in. Get your men ready to depart. You're leaving, ordered O'Brien. The two reluctantly agreed and returned to their men by the rhinos, leaving the leads of 3rd and 4th squads. Jericho, Blythe, get your men set to advance. We're losing Alpha and Bravo squads, so get ready to pick up the slack, he said, turning his attention to the two previous raiders on his detail. Fox Rider, on me. They arrived, prompt in their step. Your squad's out of commission, so you're with me. Regroup with Sergeant Grayson after you resupply. The two affirmed their orders, departing for the large man mingling with red-marked raiders beside the lead rhino. With nearly all of 1st and 2nd squads being relieved, it left O'Brien with only 2 complete squads and a fire team which consisted of Dare, Grayson, Fox, Ryder, and himself, with Badgers and Hunter away for the moment. He then turned to the silent Celian to address her. You're taking a ride with the other raiders, he said sternly, leaving little room for Vorta to interject. It's too dangerous. Even if I leave you in a rhino, there's no guarantee it won't get blown to hell. He could tell she wanted to object, as the only thing she could think of is her sister. I have to see if Tola is safe. If anything, I'll be safe, I promise, she begged, holding onto the fabric of his blotted clothing, but he didn't yield. Denied. It's far too dangerous and I have an out for you. And if you were to hide, there's no guarantee that your people or mine won't level this place. Sorry, but I'm not taking that risk. The building they gathered in front of was connected to another 4-way street, with the center large enough for a medium-sized dropship or shuttles to take what survivors they can. He had already called it in, with the operator issuing their arrival in a little over 30 minutes. The skies above were chaotic, with fighters darting across it as they chased one another, firing all manner of ordnance at one another. It wouldn't be long until the main force arrives to occupy the skies, effectively closing off Artre from any external help, but he would have to wait for that. As for the medevac, within 30 minutes, a single ship descended onto the landing zone, kicking up dust and minor debris that impacted against their armor, causing minor scuffs and dents from the engine wash. The ship was a twin engine, situated on 2 extended support wings near the center of the frame that was variable in function. Its cockpit was sleek, with the pilot in the front and the co-pilot in a raised seat behind them. Both seats were accessible through the main troop cabin with large vacuum-sealed doors that opened on the side, or a smaller ramp that opened in the rear. It was known as the Mk-7 Hawk transport. Its space was large enough for 2 squads to cram together, and they did just that, with Jericho and Blythe's squads taking security on the open sides of the roads, including their mechanized armor as added support. O'Brien met Strega at the side of the craft as she rested against the frame. "I just got word that the arm of Saul is in medium orbit, away from the fight. You're being sent there for the remainder of the battle, so rest easy," he said, trying not to be overshadowed by the ship's engine. "I won't be able to rest when we still have a fight to win," replied Strega, disappointment apparent in her voice. "I know, but it's better than losing you all in a firefight. So go, rest up," he said. "And you too, find a seat," he then said to Vorta. "But," she began. "No buts," he turned, his visor's eyes peering into hers. "I'll look for your sister, but I can't do that if I have to look behind myself for your well-being. Don't worry, I'll find her. Strega," he turned to the sergeant, "look after her for me." She nodded with a nonchalant salute. "First the wife, now a bachelorette, you scoundrel," she voiced with a smirk as the doors to the Hawk folded to its side, sealing it. It began to lift off, kicking up more dust and debris until the force of the engine's exhaust dissipated, leaving only the remainder of his platoon. It was a miracle he still had his vehicles, with those utilized by 1st and 2nd squads riddled by holes from the enemy. He ordered that they be filled by either Jericho's or Blythe's troopers. The Rhino and Grizzly crews were still operational, operating with the minimum required crew. Earlier, he was notified that they had regained map awareness and surveillance, and so he opened up his map's display in the comfort of a Rhino. The routes leading to the council's buildings were not far, with a checkpoint 1.5 miles into town from where they were stationed. The number of red indicators were heavy beyond the checkpoint, with many of their forces engaged with familiar tagged icons. The letters of Cbra, VIPR, and Raven were seen above them, with their numerical designations more apparent if he zoomed in. Most raiders dropped in the heart of the city, most notably in the outermost perimeter of the inner city, and had been fighting since then, whittling the large enemy force down, but were still outnumbered. He needed to know their situation before he could finalize his assault, and switch to a band exclusive to the leading officers of each company. Even though the actual frequency was a turn away from standard radio with their own soldiers, he called out over their officer band for their status. "4th Battalion, this is Raptor Actual. Radio check!" Silence followed, but broken calls filtered through static made their way to him. "Cobra to Raptor, good radio. We're giving 'em hell, but we can appreciate some air support," replied a gruff and experienced individual through the radio. "This is Raven, I hear you. I could ask for the same. We've got too many to deal with and they keep replacing each other. Get the pilots to assist while we're at it." Another sounded, this time younger. O'Brien thought that perhaps their commanding officer had perished, and the nearest one with the highest rank took over. The calls of affirmation were a pleasant one. After being secluded from them for so long, he felt a sense of relief at their calls. Except for Viper. They had yet to report in, so he feared the worst for them. But he had a duty to those who can hear, so he began his new issuance of orders. "All companies, this is Raptor. I have mission authority, so I'm updating your TAC map with waypoints for likely targets and platoon advances," Stand by and execute your orders when received. Affirmation was sent through his comms as he implemented his assault, as most of the other companies were engaged in continuous firefights. Each raider battalion was broken down into 4 companies, which were further broken down into 3 platoons, each consisting of 4 squads with 13 soldiers in each squad, then broken into 3 fire teams with a minimum of 4 individuals per team. But even if he wanted the entirety of the 4th Battalion in the fight, some spots were utilized elsewhere. Like with Raptor Company's Echo and Foxtrot platoons in use by the fleets above, or with a squad from Kilo Platoon from Viper Company, escorting a high-value target. And with the recent troop exodus of 2 of his squads in Delta Platoon, his own force was now only half the size, so he appreciated the armor that was gifted to him. For the assault strategy, O'Brien organized each fire team to link with the nearest team in combat, ignoring their home companies, as right now they were the only force engaged with the enemy. "Raptors, load up. It's time to move," he ordered his platoon as he continued organizing troop placements. When he was done, he looked one final time at their routes. He organized all smaller fire teams to disengage and regroup with the nearest squad towards their objective, and continued that exponential growth towards the direction of the central city. "Athena," he called out. "Monitor friendly tags and update waypoints for value targets. Weapon systems, batteries, commanders, doesn't matter. Keep IFF tags updated. I'll leave their command to you." "Of course, sir. I'll do my best," she replied. "I'll keep you updated on any developments of Celian tactics." "Do that," replied O'Brien, now keeping his eye on his tactical map display. "Let's see what you can do." Part 2. If not for their air superiority, he would have found it difficult to mount an organized offensive if they lacked proper intelligence. But before a drop, they were normally briefed on their drop zone and broken down to the fire team on who would go where, hours before their drop. So each person would know what to do and where to go if they were separated from a commanding authority. Luckily, due to their training, they were taught such things as small unit leadership, since large unit leadership generally fell apart shortly after a drop, resulting in chaos, but also added to their effectiveness. Their organized chaos aided in their attacks because on a tactical display, their forces would look disorganized and ineffective, but their training capitalized on that, allowing small groups to exercise their training to the fullest, to do the most with less. This was evidenced with clusters of raider teams ranging from 4 to 8 against an enemy numerically superior, but he noticed they took a well-executed flanking maneuvers to ruin the Celian advance. When the enemy group fired back, they had used most of their troops to attack the enemy flanks, inadvertently lowering their focus on the larger group, allowing them to move in swiftly. One by one, enemy tags disappeared as the team moved in, with the enemy dancing to and from their flanks. They were boxed in, and there was nothing they could do except fight. "Sir, we see the checkpoint, 1,200 meters. How copy?" called the Rhino's operator, his voice reverberating through his comm system. O'Brien looked on his TAC map for enemy indicators, finding nothing. It was suspicious, but it's possible they diverted troops from the checkpoints after the drop. "Advance, but check for anti-armor. All raiders, step off. We're going on foot," he ordered. His words received a hearty "Oorah" or "Yes, sir" from his soldiers as their boots met the ground. Their formation was one used in standard mechanized patrol. The raiders placed themselves on the outsides of the road, with the armor driving through the center with their weapons facing opposite directions. The Grizzlies took the front and rear portions of the patrol, with the Rhinos in the center with the Pumas spaced out, so as not to be parallel with each other. He peeked at his TAC map once more for enemy tags that might have popped up. As far as its capability went, it depended on their source. For his tactical map display to be useful, he would need it constantly updated, which meant constant surveillance from a third party. They had 4 forms for this to work. The first was by ship scans from a specific module that could detect precise movement, thermals, and electromagnetic, but it was an item that was relegated to very few ships simply for its cost. The next was a feed by satellite. It offered a stable feed for the map if they had access to it, but it was difficult in areas where covert was a must, and even attempting to access the enemy's satellites would trip alarms, a situation he had come across before. The third option worked best. Bust was just as expensive as the first, which was a stealth drone that would fly overhead. It was easy to notice at day, so it was best used at night, but not every operation allowed them that luxury. But their final and current form of surveillance was the use of an overhead manned ship. It was one outfitted to fight, but offered assistance in momentary map awareness if fuel and lacking enemy presence allowed, which is why air superiority was a key ingredient in their missions, and as fate would have it, their advantage would flee. "Raptor, this is Hostess. I can't be your eyes. We got bogeys incoming, too much for current air defense. RTB for refuel. Be back soon," stated the pilot. "Damn it, give us one last ping," requested O'Brien of the pilot. She did as he asked, lighting up his map with enemy targets when he noticed a group that wasn't present last time. The pings couldn't be relied on too much for an aircraft feed, since it was poor at penetrating layers of buildings. They were further down the road where the road made only a left and right turn, with a large building at the end that faced them. It wasn't far from the checkpoint, roughly 200 meters to his company. However, the hairs stood up on the ends of his neck when he realized what type of area they were in. They were in their sights, and they had entered a kill zone. He noticed a flash from one of the windows, followed by others, and he fell to the ground by instinct. However, instead of falling forward to enter the prone position, he felt the left portion of his chest sting, followed by a dull pain that recoiled his body to his rear, landing him on his back. He gasped for air as his chest struggled to regulate his breathing, and he clenched his chest with reflex. "Officer down!" The sound originated near him, but his vision had blurred from the impact, and a ringing sound filtered through his ears. He felt a pressure from his upper back, and the ground beneath him rode against his clothing. He was being dragged, and by Fox and Ryder no less. Dulled cracks of gunfire erupted around him, with his helmet working overtime to muffle their sharp tones. Traces of gunfire were delivered from the axial guns mounted on the rhinos, with lines of tracers trailing to where the shot came from, peppering the outer walls. His body also shook with every shot fired from their main cannon, firing in bursts of 5 to 8, decimating the building. The two had taken him into a recess of a building, shielding him from bullets from the surviving enemy. Fox had taken to be their security while Ryder began her triage of his body, feeling it up and down for any extra wounds not made by the initial shot. She removed his helmet, and the sounds of combat began to deafen him, but she spoke with clarity through her helmet amidst the chaos. "Sir, stick with me!" She began prodding round the entry of the bullet as she continued to treat for any shock. "Do you have anywhere that hurts? A sharp pain in the chest?" He shook his head. "Chest. Numb. Feels warm." His words were short as he tried to manage his breathing. By clicking on some quick release mechanisms, Ryder was able to detach the armor that was hit. It had some weight to it, but was lighter than it looked, even for an armored plate designed to cover his heart and upper chest, with a lesser plated version beneath to cover the rest of his torso. She examined it closely, then to the area beneath the impact zone. "Looks good, sir. UA plate is intact for the most part, and the ballistics gel isn't leaking. We can patch it and you'd be good to go. No exit, so they weren't using AP. But it's enough to leave a bruise," reported Ryder. The entry was deep, with the tail end of a bullet barely sticking out. As she said, the round had entered, but did little to deform the backing of the plate, even if the entry hole looked grievous. That was a feature all current Raider armor utilized on the central upper chest plating. It was an alloy with a hollowed center, filled with a non-Newtonian gel that hardens to physical trauma. He placed his hand on the round that protruded from his chest armor, feeling its heat bleed through his suit, and plucked it from his chest, at the dismay of Ryder. "Sir, I'm not done yet. You can't just—" she began, before her superior cut her off, tossing aside the previously lodged round. It clanged with each impact against the ground, adding to the countless spent casings and slangs of rifles firing. "We got any more plates?" he asked, and he steadied himself, using the nearest cover as support. Compared to the previous two squads, led by Auclair and Strega, they were in worse condition than he was, and he had no one he could send home for a medical evac. He had no choice but to commit to their assault. "No, sir, we're all out. Best I can do is a sealant. Hold still," she ordered. She then took a small canister from a pouch and began to spray into the entry. It filled until it was near flush with the rest of the armor, and she placed the can back into her pouch, assisting O'Brien as he stood up. "It won't have as much protection with a round of that size, but it'll hold against small arms. Thanks, Ryder. Regroup with the rest and prepare to advance," he said, stabilizing himself. He felt sore in his upper chest, but with the application of adrenaline-based medication, he was now awake and aware, and the sounds of gunfire put him at alert. He checked his magazines and his weapon, both of which were sufficient for combat. He checked his tactical map, revealing only the immediate portion of his platoon's area, with the outlines of buildings added just beyond their sensors. Luckily, his command module for his tactical map connected to the sensors of his subordinates. So what they see, he sees. The only problem was their proximity to the enemy, something he didn't want to waste manpower on. Instead, he opted for a more destructive alternative. "Grizzlies," he called out over their shared comms. "See that building? I don't want to." They gave a hearty call of affirmation over the radio as they loaded a series of high-explosive rounds with an added kick. At his order, their barrels raised slightly above their base position and fired. There wasn't a hum of their rail cannon activating, telling him that they fired their ordnance magnetically unassisted. The round pierced the Celian-made walls with relative ease, and a detonation occurred beyond the veil of the structured walls. Air burst. A round designed to explode mid-air, causing maximum damage in all directions, unlike the damage caused from an explosion on a singular plane. In most instances, it did little against targets with equal armor and shielding, but if a round made its way into the interior of a tank, then the occupants were reduced to liquid. The round was dubbed simply the burst. "Burst round delivered. Make sure you wear waterproof shoes, it might be a mess in there," said the lead Grizzly operator. "Got nothing on thermals, so proceed with caution. We'll keep firing the coax until you reach the building." O'Brien acknowledged the operator and ordered his men to advance with the rhinos as the Grizzlies continued firing into the building. A mix of main cannon and coaxial machine gun peppered the building as they continued forth until they were near the base. The rhinos and pumas blockaded the roads to their left and right for cover, with a detachment of the squads to secure their perimeter, clearing the immediate buildings. "Fox, Ryder, Gray, with me. Jericho, get a fire team to secure the lower floors," ordered O'Brien. "Understood. Jones, Marquez, Carmine, Tyrus, secure first floor," said Jericho. The four he called methodically entered the building as they secured its rooms. After a moment, they returned, with Carmine noting its safety. "Fox, take point," said O'Brien. Ryder was next to follow, with himself and Grayson after her. The building itself wasn't tall, sitting around 7 stories, but the walls outside of it were littered with bullet holes, and walls torn from the Grizzlies' firepower, with most of the firepower centered to the 5th level. As they moved through the building, they found many of the rooms with rows of desks and cubicles, similar to companies back home. Looking at his HUD, he didn't notice anything out of the ordinary on his mini-map, nor on his night visor, which appropriately outlined and highlighted everyday items and friends and foes. As they made their way up, his fire team had finally entered the 5th floor, taking care to move through it. For his search, he focused where they had fired the most, a room whose entirety ran the width of the building and overlooked the street where they approached from. He was slow to enter, but when he did, he felt a sudden change in the ground he stepped on. He felt a layer of viscous liquid with each step. When he looked down, he saw it. A room of barely recognizable Celian remains. They were donned with the standard Celian ground troop armor, sporting the standard black and gray undersuit, with silver-colored plating on the chest, shoulders, and knees. Some donned a red sash around their waist. They were the most recognizable but lacked all other appendages, and a helmet that was turquoise on the backing and glacial blue on the front. Unlike the barren version of soldiers prior, these belonged to a specialized enemy group, one whose name eluded him. Their weapons as well were different from their standard soldier. While equally worn, the weapons before him were gilded with amber on the top shroud of their rifle, with a teal wrap around the grip. "Airburst really makes it hard to walk through the aftermath," voiced Grayson. To think it would do this against an alien. Glad it wasn't me. Sergeant, is that appropriate? I almost feel bad for them, chimed Ryder. If I go out, I at least want to be able to have an open casket, not to be remembered as goo, she gagged at the sight. No one wants to die, but it's not my job to ensure if the enemy can have an open or closed casket. And from what I know, they all deserve to be bird food, rebuked Gray. That's enough, commanded O'Brien, causing the two raiders to quiet themselves. Fox, Ryder, scour the next 2 floors, Gray. Assist them. They departed, leaving him in the room alone with the remains of the Celian soldiers. He moved to the window overlooking the road and saw the 2 grizzlies with the rest of the platoon enclosing the rest of their perimeter. He then looked over to the surrounding raiders as they conversed with one another as they also maintained vigilance to their exterior. Some had taken this time to rest as they could, eating or drinking behind the cover of the rhinos. All the while, tracers from gunfire and missiles littered the sky, with the crackle and booms muffled over the distance. The battle had surrounded them, but even he took time for some reprieve. Once more, he peered beyond the dilapidated and destroyed outlook to his men and the rest of the city. However, in the midst of gunfire in the distance and the very low thuds of boots above him, he noticed something off from behind him. He checked his minimap with a glance, noting the 2 raiders, Fox and Ryder, by his map's indicator. Elevation was determined by either an upright or downright triangle, and any floors beyond that were indicated by a line that lined the base. Both were 2 levels above him, with Grayson moving below. There were no others besides them, but he heard it. It sounded small, like someone sliding quietly through liquid, taking care to not land a heavy step. Luckily for him, his helmet's adaptive noise picked up the slight noise to a barely audible level, but that made it distinct. By sound alone, he gauged their distance, but even that was unreliable, and with the presence not picking up on motion raised alarms to the unknown enemy. For him, his left hand was clasped around the foregrip of his badger, with his right relaxed over his thigh, above his sidearm. As he listened, the footsteps grew louder, in comparison to before, enough for him to gauge the distance and the threat. "Don't miss because you won't get another shot," he spoke, seemingly to the empty space. But with his words, the movement from before halted, confirming his suspicions, and likely stunned from the break of his concealment. "Well, I didn't think anyone could hear me," said the voice. "You must be their commander. What would happen to your troops if one such as you, who bested the great Bralo, were to perish?" O'Brien turned his body a quarter to the left when he was ordered to stop, as the individual had their weapon trained. He expected him to fire and be done with it, but he didn't. Instead, the individual opted for a dialogue, perhaps to get any information before ending him. "Me? Well, you'd certainly do some damage to my troops, but it won't be the end. There's always someone that can take my place and finish the mission," replied O'Brien. "I don't believe there are many armies who can survive with their leadership gone. It's the same for us, and with the Union. I doubt you're any different. I'm sure if I take you, your Terran offensive is sure to crumble," rebuked the individual. O'Brien's head was turned so that he was able to barely see the individual, outlined in the corner of his HUD. He was surprised to see that there was an outline at all, colored in amber with no one within it, like it was a ghost. "Cloaking, huh?" he muttered. "Color me surprised. You know of it? Then perhaps it's best to end you now," they said. "To think an enemy of Celia would know of our technology. Who spoke? So that I may finish them when I'm done here. I will say your tech is clever, better than ours, but not out of the realm of possibility," replied O'Brien as he slowly motioned his free hand closer to his sidearm, poised to draw. The individual before him seemed formal in their exchange, which had him on edge. The outline revealed no large caliber weapon. Instead, it was that on a sidearm, much like his own. "And no one did," added O'Brien. "We don't need a Celian to tell us about tech. We have plenty of our own. Besides, how would you like to settle this like warriors?" The question caught the Celian off guard. "In a bout of fists? Are you crazy? I should end you now." "It's because I know your race is weak, so you make up for it with your navy. You wouldn't stand a chance against my lowest-ranked raider," replied O'Brien, cutting off the Sellian. The individual had seriously considered his opponent's proposition, slightly lowering his weapon in thought. From his perspective, even if they fired, it would land in his torso, either with the up-armored chest plate or the rig that covered the rest of his upper body. He had no time to waste, and before the weapon trained on him, he drew his sidearm. 3 shots fired from O'Brien's weapon, landing the first in the chest, which rocked the body of the Sellian, but it impacted their chest armor, lodging itself deep. The second was also fired into the chest, doing the same as the first and lodging itself deep into the chest. The third, however, was fired into the pelvic region, causing it to collapse and scream out in pain. He then disregarded his grip on his rifle, placing it together with his sidearm, and moved towards the downed target as it continued to writhe in pain. O'Brien kicked away the weapon they held as their cloaking system failed, revealing the Sellian in its entirety. "Ah, you." He tried to speak, but the pain in his pelvis and chest was too great for him to speak. "First rule of combat, there are no rules, because at the end of the day you have to survive. Rules don't apply if they'll leave you dead," said O'Brien. "I know the rules of engagement better than anybody, but I also know firsthand that those very rules killed raiders. Good raiders." He fired his sidearm into the helmet of his enemy, piercing through the amber veil that was their visor. 2 holes were made, and a web of cracks formed across the visor. The body was now motionless, and a pool of green liquid began to pool through the entry wounds, staining its uniform. It wasn't usual for him to monologue to dying opposition, but he felt like he needed someone to vent to, and to take out his frustration on. He knew it was going to be messy, but it irked him that he hadn't seen any Marines or orbital troopers on the ground with them. Instead, his battalion is leading the charge, and they're not even at full strength. He was just thankful it had gone relatively smoothly. Fox and Ryder then entered through the door with their weapons drawn, expertly clearing the room as they approached their commander, and then to the body of the now expired Sellian. "Sir, we heard shots. Are you hit?" Ryder was the first to speak, looking O'Brien up and down for any wounds, to which she found none. "Turns out we had a friend among the dead. He didn't register on motion, but the night visor did, even if they were cloaked," he explained. "Cloak? I didn't think they would have the tech," she replied. "Only people I know who have that would be Reaper Company," she said, this time in a hushed tone, as if the people she spoke of were in the room with her. "I thought the same, but even if the system couldn't identify friend or foe, it still counted it as an object. So I think he was hiding among the bodies of his comrades." "Clever," he replied. "In any case, let's move out and notify Jericho and Blythe of our discovery." They replied with a quiet "aye, sir," before returning to the platoon below. He then contacted Dare on the latest development pertaining to their ghostly friends. "Dare, we have some advanced resistance. Cloaked enemies, they won't show up as foe on your visor, so take care when engaging." "Copy," replied the sniper. "I'll keep an eye out." The call disconnected, and O'Brien was now left to himself. He ensured to notify all current platoon commanders of a possible cloaked enemy in the field. They suspected the enemy to employ some form of advanced technology, but not cloaking. "Understood, Raptor. Cobra is clear and moving towards the objective from the east. We've managed to link up with most of Raven Company. Then we can also hit him from the north and draw him out. Should make it easy for your end to attack," spoke the Cobra commander. It was a sound tactical decision, and if the enemy encountered a heavy presence of the enemy, then they're sure to divert most of their focus to the north and east. "What of Viper? Have you heard from them?" asked O'Brien. "No, I haven't heard anything from them, and most aren't showing up on the TAC map. I'm just seeing scattered fire teams at most," said Cobra, his tone solemn and filled with worry about his fellow raiders, as was O'Brien. "Last I saw, they dropped damn near the center of enemy territory. Although I am picking up a squad holed up in a building, no more than 6, in between yourself and the objective." It was, as he said, there was a squad held up in a building centered between 2 large roads and what looked like a park to his northeast. Compared to the other companies, Viper was the only one that dropped away from each other, with squads of up to 4 dropping together. They were known to drop erratically, occasionally landing themselves in the thick of the enemy, with most instances resulting in their immediate deaths. But those that survived were a force to be reckoned with. He had now regrouped with the rest of his platoon, notifying them of their change of plans. "Load up, we're double-timing it to Viper. It's supposed to be a hot zone, so get ready to engage a target-rich environment." Jericho and Blythe gave acknowledgement in the form of a hearty rah, before departing to their vehicles and organizing their respective squads. O'Brien had previously tried to get into contact with them, but to no avail. Instead, he referred to Dare for intel since the building he inhabited was still standing and had overlooked most of their area. "Dare," he spoke into his comm set. "There should be a park to my northeast with a squad from Viper under heavy contact. Verify." It took a moment, but his answer came soon after he embarked as a passenger on a Puma. The sun was beginning to crest the horizon now, and its blue and purple hue hugged the sky with each minute. "Barely. I have a set of buildings blocking my view, but I can see the roof of a central building in the center of the park. No trees, but lots of smoke and tracer fire coming from the building." "Wait one," said Dare. He had now switched to the anti-material rifle, since it offered a better long-range scope than his suppressed variant. It was digital in nature, offering an overlay of information for the user, but had a perfect zoom well beyond what was necessary, especially at the distance he was shooting. He rotated the single-action bolt to the rear, loading in the round until the bolt seeded it into the chamber with a thudded click before locking the bolt and taking aim. His first instinct was to scan the roofs of the buildings surrounding the squad. Without much effort, he had already found several teams of enemy artillery and marksmen taking aim and bombarding the squad with mortar fire. It was a constant stream of fire as bursts of smoke erupted on and around the singular building. "Sir, they won't have long. They've got mortars and accurate fire. They aren't letting up. You'll need to hurry," he said before firing a shot at an unsuspecting marksman. "Copy," replied O'Brien. "All teams double-time it. Weapons free and execute with extreme prejudice. Secure that AO.